like go. Remember that part?
Yep. Ready? Hey friends, I'm Steph from Cheapskate Cook. And you are?
Jet.
Jet, yes you are. We're gonna make bread today.
Here's our stuff.
Okay, I have a question, and that is, does bread baking scare you? Because it scares a lot of people. So many of us did not grow up making bread next to our mom and seeing, homemade bread as a normal part of life. And so yeast bread is super intimidating. We don't want anything to do with it because it's kind of scary. And sometimes when we try it, it turns into like bricks and then we're super frustrated. But at the same time, homemade bread is like the best. So I want to give you a recipe today that I grew up learning how to make, and it is one of the easiest, simplest bread recipes that you can make. It is very inexpensive. I've already vetted all of the ingredients to make sure that we are using extremely inexpensive ingredients. Hi, bud. Are you just gonna make faces in the background?
I love it.
So it's something that my kids have grown up making as well, and so I've got my kid with me today, and he's going to help me make it so that you know just how easy it is. Do you need a tissue? Honestly, if I could only smell 3 things for the rest of my life, it would be campfires, homemade bread, and my husband's cologne. Probably in that order. So I make homemade bread. One of the questions a lot of people have is making your own bread cheaper than making or buying regular bread? And the answer to that is yes, sometimes. So when you think of the ingredients that go into homemade bread, it's olive oil, it's sugar, it's some yeast, it's water, some flour, and not much else really. So those are all pretty inexpensive ingredients. So yes, if you are counting the ingredients, then making homemade bread is way cheaper than buying it. Because those ingredients for homemade bread only cost like pennies. And if you're buying even like the cheapest of the cheap nasty bread at the grocery store, you're gonna spend at least $1 or $2 a loaf. But when we talk about saving money and eating healthy, I want to encourage you to realize that your time is valuable too. So the amount of time that you spend baking your own bread or baking other homemade goods, that counts as the cost of what you are cooking. So on the one hand, you will invest some time, which is money, into learning how to bake your own bread. But if you get the hang of it, which again, this is the easiest bread recipe, then it's going to be a really good investment of that time. I've been making homemade bread for so long that I hardly put any time or effort into it because I know exactly what to do in order to make this recipe turn out great. In some seasons of life, I do not make our bread. It's just too much, especially with the amount of bread that my family eats. So I don't make it all the time, but I do make it as often as I can because it is such a great cost savings over the years. It's got a short ingredients list, I know exactly what's in it, and it's one of my family's favorite foods, so homemade bread. Now, this is my master bread recipe, which means it is the main bread recipe that I use for everything, okay? I use this recipe for sandwich bread, dinner rolls, calzones, pizza crust, cinnamon rolls. Trying to think what else. If I want to make like a fancy little braid, if I want to add and tweak some things, like I'll do oatmeal in there, or I'll do some corn flour in there. You can even cut it up into little pieces, dunk it in some butter and cinnamon sugar, and make monkey bread. This bread recipe is everything. You don't need to learn 100 different recipes to make a whole bunch of things from scratch. Just master this one recipe and get baking. One thing I want to address here is the difference between, let me grab it. active dry yeast and instant yeast. So this is active dry yeast that I buy in bulk from like Costco or Sam's Club. I can buy it, I can just have a little jar like this in my fridge, and then I can put the rest into the freezer and it lasts for a long time. Like, so long I can't even remember the last time I bought yeast. It lasts for years in the freezer. And then I keep the rest of it in the fridge to keep it fresh and active. But this is active dry yeast, which means ideally you dissolve it in liquids before you add it to your bread. And you'll see how I do that when I show you how to make this bread. Instant yeast is different. So instant yeast, you don't have to dissolve it in liquid first. You just mix it in with the flour and whatever and just move on with your life. I prefer active dry yeast simply because that's what I can get in bulk, so it's really, really cheap. One question a lot of people have is, how do you keep homemade bread from falling apart? So as much as we love slicing into bread fresh from the oven, if you want bread that's not crumbly, you have to let it cool. If you're slicing bread to eat with dinner, I think it's fine if you just cut into it while it's hot and watch the butter melt as you spread it, which is amazing. However, if you are planning to use your bread for sandwiches, let your bread cool and wait at least 2 or 3 hours before slicing into it. And that will give you the non-crumbly homemade bread that you're looking for, that's ideal for sandwiches. Let's talk about what makes bread soft and fluffy. If you read the ingredients label on a loaf of store-bought bread, even the loaves from the bakery section, which need to be eaten in a couple days or else they start going stale, you'll see a long list of ingredients. Each ingredient is there on purpose. They all play a part in making bread soft and fluffy and longer lasting than a normal loaf of homemade bread. So homemade bread is not as soft and fluffy as the grocery store has trained us to expect. However, in my opinion, it's still more delicious. Plus, the short, clean ingredients list on homemade bread makes it even better. So what you're really looking for in dough that has been kneaded long enough is for you to be able to press your finger into it and for it to bounce gently back up. It doesn't need to spring up completely, but as long as you're not leaving a permanent indent in the bread, then it's ready to go. And that just means the gluten strands have been activated and it's ready to be made into bread. Sometimes if it's a little cold outside, then I will actually put a piece of masking tape over the baking controls on my oven, turn on the oven light so the oven's a little warm but not too warm and doesn't accidentally get turned on. And then I'll pop the bread dough into the oven so it has a nice warm place to rise. Usually because the oven is a little drier than if it was just sitting on my counter, I have to put a thicker dish towel over the top. I want to address really quick whole wheat bread or even just whole wheat ingredients. So I found that the whole wheat that I can buy at the grocery store, it's actually kind of stale tasting and gross, and it's also way more expensive. And if you look at the way whole wheat add a cup or two of whole wheat flour just to add more fiber or just make it a little more nutritious, you can do that and it doesn't change the texture too much. I found that if you go 100% whole wheat or more than half whole wheat, you start getting like that really dense, crumbly texture that makes a lot of people go, ugh, whole wheat, homemade bread, like it's crumbly and gross and hard as a brick. My non-crumbly whole wheat bread recipe is not like that, for one very special reason, which I explained in the video. But in this case, I want to encourage you to either try all white flour or just add like 1 or 2 cups of the whole wheat flour. So this is an ideal recipe and video for people who are just learning how to bake homemade bread, or you just want to learn how to make the best homemade bread ever that you can use for all kinds of things. But if whole grain is very, very important to you, I have a ton of recipes on my blog that use whole wheat, and I have a non-crumbly whole wheat sandwich bread recipe here on YouTube. So I encourage you to check that out if you want whole wheat. Today we're just doing white bread. Do you like bread? Any kind of bread?
It depends.
Yeah, what kind of bread do you not like?
Mostly crumbly bread.
Yeah, there you go. Crumbly bread. Nobody likes crumbly bread. Here's what it's supposed to look like after the first rise. So it's not huge. It will get bigger with subsequent rises, but you can tell it's different from when we put it in the oven. If you put whole wheat flour in here, then it's gonna be even smaller, but that's okay. You don't need to punch it down quite as aggressively as my kid just punched it down, but you know, 1 or 2 punches and it's fine. Then you put the towel back over it, pop it back in the oven, and it's ready for its second rise. After you punch it down the second time, don't just yank the bread dough out of the bowl. Ripping the dough rips the gluten strands, and they will make your bread light and soft. So scoop out the dough and gently twist it in half to make 2 equal-sized pieces. Take half of your bread dough, and this is going to make 1 loaf of delicious, amazing homemade bread. Alright, first get a stick of butter and you're going to peel it a little bit and then use it to grease the pan. I know you can use just spray grease, but that's kind of gross and we're doing real food here, so use butter or coconut oil if you are dairy free. Now you're going to take the dough, flip it upside down and just gently pat it into kind of a rectangle shape, and then fold it into thirds, just like this, and then tuck in the ends so that it makes the loaf shape. This kind of ensures that the dough is gonna look really beautiful as it rises, and then as it bakes, it's gonna give you that perfect little hill of golden brown bread. I like to take a bread knife and just very gently cut the center. You don't have to do that, it just looks pretty when you're done baking. Here's a little frugal tip, just save your butter wrappers after you let butter soften, and I like to just store them in the fridge because then they can last a long time, and then whenever I need to grease a pan, I just use the wrapper. So here I am taking half of a batch of dough that we just made, and I'm going to make some dinner rolls with it. Rip it in half, and then rip it in quarters, and then rip that piece into 3 parts, and doing it this way just ensures that you get more or less even rolls. I mean, they're not going to be perfect, but here I want you to really pay attention to how I make the rolls. So you can see I'm just tucking the edges into the back of the roll, which will actually be the very bottom of the roll. And doing it this way kind of ensures that you get a really beautiful, smooth top, which will keep all of the air trapped inside the rolls as they bake, and just gonna make really beautiful, light and fluffy rolls. And then you just rinse and repeat until you run out of dough. It only takes like a couple of minutes. Alright, cinnamon rolls. These are like my favorite things to make. You're just gonna take half of the bread dough and spread it out. You can use a rolling pin or a cup. In case you can't find your rolling pin, a cup totally works. But the main idea here when you're patting out the dough is that you don't want to rip it. Because again, that's all about the gluten strands. So you just kind of pat it out until it's the perfect size. Next, make your cinnamon sugar. That's going to be 3 tablespoons of sugar and then 3 teaspoons of cinnamon. Stir it all up and set it aside. Next, spread the dough with a generous amount of butter. I really never ever measure how much butter, just do what feels good. I think I used like half a stick. Add the cinnamon sugar, and gently roll it up like a sleeping bag. Cut your cinnamon roll log into like 2-inch slices. 1 inch, they're gonna be too short and fat and squatty, but 2 inches is kind of the perfect height. For cinnamon roll icing, I just like to use a little bit of milk and a bunch of powdered sugar and call it good. I didn't get footage of me making that because this is actually just some leftover icing that was in my freezer. Highly recommend if you ever have leftover icing, just put it in a plastic bag in the freezer. Please tell me I am not the only one who eats cinnamon rolls by peeling the layers away. I feel like this is the only right way to eat a cinnamon roll. If you just bite into it, I don't know what to do with that. If I'm making pizza dough, I will actually let my pizza dough rise a little longer because pizza dough just tastes better the more you let the flavors develop and the longer it goes. You can even make it the day before and then put it in the fridge overnight, and that will make the flavors develop even more. Other days, if I'm short on time, I will skip all the punching altogether and just let it rise for like an hour or an hour and a half and then make it into the pizza crust. I know that there's a right way to do this and there are certain techniques you can use to make the flavors extra awesome, but the reality is I've got a lot of stuff to do and this tastes amazing even if I just keep it super flexible with my schedule and the amount of time that I have and the amount of energy that I have that day. It's my favorite kind of recipe. Just do whatever you want and it'll be delicious. Let's say you make a batch of dough, but you don't want to deal with it right away. You can just wrap it in plastic wrap and then put it in a freezer bag. Make sure you label it and use it for anything you want after that. I found that frozen dough works best for me if I use it like in pizza crust where it doesn't have to rise super high after it thaws, but that's just my opinion. Okay friends, this was my master bread dough recipe. I hope that you got lots of ideas. I hope that you saw how simple it can be. Even if yeast bread is kind of overwhelming to you, I really encourage you to try this particular recipe because it's very forgiving and you can use it to make all kinds of things. So if it doesn't rise very well for you, then just make some pizza crust. I'm Steph from CheapskateCook.com. Thank you so much for joining me in my kitchen. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more ways to save money and eat healthy. One thing I want to I think I'm burping. One thing I want to it's my master bread recipe and I want to show you it's my master bread recipe and I want to show you how to do it so that you know.
Yummy.
What's up, baby?
Remember to edit out all the faults, especially Ruby